Hi guys, welcome back to RUE MORGUE TV. I'm executive editor Andrea Subasati, and I've got a question for you. Are you subscribed to our newsletter? The RUE MORGUE reader will come into your inbox every single month, and it's got a sneak peek at everything RUE MORGUE. If it's going into the magazine, if it's new in the shop, any news, stuff like that, you will find out about it first, but only if you're subscribed. So hit the link below to do that. Enjoy the episode, and we'll see you next time.
Hi, I'm Alex West, co-host of the Faculty of Horror podcast, and we're here today to talk about the Oscars. Who wins them? Who's up for consideration? And do they matter? So, if you're a film fan, you probably know about the Oscars. They're voted on by the Academy Awards members, and they are something that generates a lot of buzz, a lot of controversy, and to some people, they really matter, but to a lot of people, they don't. So, we thought it would be a good opportunity today to talk about the ins and outs of how the Oscars work, and in particular relation to horror. There's so much sadness and anger every year that the nominations come out and people see that not enough horror was nominated, but there's a really good reason for that, and that reason has to do with money, but we're going to get into that in a second. The Oscars were actually started in 1928 by Louis B. Mayer, who was then head of MGM Studios. He thought that Hollywood and film needed a really good public face, that there should have an organization that went out into the world and did good things with film. And also, he was having a lot of problems with labor unions at the time, so maybe there'd be a good way to squash labor disputes by forming some kind of group or even an academy. This all happened very quickly. He gathered together a lot of industry professionals, and they very quickly decided that labor disputes weren't something they were super interested in, but they were interested in giving each other awards. This became very public very quickly. By 1930, the Oscars were being broadcast over the airwaves on radio. By 1953, they were on television. So something that was kind of a private industry event was very much up for public consumption. And that's because, well, it makes sense, doesn't it? We all pay our hard-earned money to go experience film. And so we kind of want that transparency. We want to know what the industry is saying about itself. And that's essentially what the Oscars are. They are an industry-based award. It isn't necessarily for the best of the best of the best, which it pretends to be, but sometimes they just want to give each other and themselves and their friends a nice little statue to take home. So there are 17 branches to the Academy currently, and each branch is like a different trade. So you've got an actor branch, a director branch, editor branch, cinematographer, hair, makeup, all of that stuff. Each branch votes on their kind of individual awards, and then everyone gets to vote on Best Picture for who they think should be nominated.
Let's say all you ever knew were apples. Apples, apples, and more apples. You might think apples were pretty good, even if you got a rotten one once in a while. But then one day, there's an orange. And now you can make a decision. Do you want an apple, or do you want an orange? That's democracy.
I also like bananas.
All of those nominees get tallied up, and the nominees with the most votes get the actual nomination. Kind of following, sort of, maybe. Well, once those nominations come out, a whole other ballot gets sent out to all the Academy members. They get to vote on everything across the board, and then the ones with the most votes win, and they get an Oscar. And that means that their careers can do really well, and it means that they get increased budgets, increased salaries, notoriety. There's a lot of prestige that comes with getting an Oscar, and that's why they're really valuable within the industry. But there's a certain kind of film that keeps winning, and there are certain kinds of actors that keep winning some of the most notable and high-profile awards. And they're usually actors and films that have to do with prestige genre films. So historical epics, drama, period pieces, all of these kind of things that are what we kind of loosely term as Oscar bait. And these are films that are essentially kind of shittily designed to win Oscars. And these are studio endeavors that are totally transparent, totally crap and frankly very manipulative. So in order to break through that, in order for a horror film, a science fiction film, a comedy film, a superhero film to not only get nominations and win, you have to break through so much noise. And you know what? I almost can't be mad at the Academy for constantly going after the Oscar bait. Like, you don't get mad at a fish for eating the crappy food you put in their tank. So a lot of people like to say that the Academy and the Oscars just hate horror. They hate it, they think it's trash, they think it's garbage. And if you're one of those people, I think maybe you're projecting a little bit, I don't know. But the Oscars actually don't have that terrible a history with the horror genre. There have been huge gaps in when they've honored horror, but let's talk about some notable nominations and some notable wins. So one of the first notable wins for the horror genre in the history of the Oscars was actually in 1932, when Friedrich March won for Best Actor as his portrayal as both Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde in the titular film. You had a couple other films in the following years and decades, like The Phantom of the Opera, and films like Whatever Happened to Baby Jane getting nominations and a couple technical award wins, The Bad Seed, and Psycho. Psycho got a good amount of nominations, including a Best Director nomination for Alfred Hitchcock, Janet Leigh, and Best Supporting Actress. So there's some momentum, but again, they're having to tear through a lot of more mainstream stuff. Now, where horror gets really exciting in terms of the Oscars is as we kind of get into the late 60s, when we're getting into that golden age of contemporary American horror films, or New Hollywood as some people like to call it. Now, in 1968, Rosemary's Baby came out, and that was a huge sensation. And Ruth Gordon actually won a Best Supporting Actress Oscar for her role as Minnie Cassavetes. And they won Best Adapted Screenplay for Rosemary's Baby as well. Another big Oscar kind of moment for horror was when The Exorcist came out. Now, I'm sure you've all seen The Exorcist. Yes? Yeah? Okay, cool. It's still so crazy for today's standards. You got a child stabbing herself in the crotch with a crucifix. And yet it was a cultural sensation. People were lined up around the block for it. It was getting amazing reviews, did a huge box office, and the Academy couldn't ignore it. So it got several nominations and won a couple technical awards. You're gonna see this trend kind of play out over the next few years into the next decade or so, with a lot of technical awards going to horror, as we saw a lot of practical effects come into their own. So you had Rick Baker getting nominated for An American Werewolf in London. A lot of the work around Poltergeist was nominated. And then as we head into the 90s, something interesting happens. We're getting a few more studio films that feel like horror films. So that's when you see someone like Kathy Bates win Best Actress for her role as Annie Wilkes in Misery. And you've got films like Bram Stoker's Dracula and Sleepy Hollow, again, picking up those really crucial technical awards. The Sixth Sense, like if you don't remember when The Sixth Sense came out, like that was everywhere that summer. And again, that resulted in a lot of Academy Award nominations, including one for Toni Collette for Best Supporting Actress. So, you know, she got a nomination for a horror movie. It's okay. It's a while back, but it's still okay. Now, one of the most significant relationships between horror and the Oscars happened in the early 90s with Silence of the Lambs. And that swept the Oscars. Whether you consider it a thriller, whether you consider it a horror film, if you lie somewhere in between, kind of like I do, even as a thriller, it's messed up. It is dark and gory. Like there's a guy with lungs on the outside of his skin. And that won so many Oscars. It won what is considered the Big Five. So that would be Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor, Best Actress, and Best Screenplay. So that kind of blew everyone away, that a film with that kind of visceral gore and that kind of tension could do that. And then what you see happening kind of into the 2000s is it gets kind of quiet again. One of the big wins during this era was Natalie Portman getting Best Actress for Black Swan. And again, the Academy really loves when an actor transforms, not necessarily into a swan, but Natalie Portman, who hadn't really done ballet, learning ballet. Yes, they CGI'd her face on a ballet dancer for large parts of the film, but she really, really tried. Then horror is a bit quiet in the Oscar lineage until last year, until 2017 or early 2018 when the ceremony happened. And Jordan Peele's Get Out just racked up so many nominations, including Best Picture, Best Actor, and he won for Best Original Screenplay. Now, for a lot of people, it actually wasn't a big surprise that Jordan Peele would get that award because kind of in the history of Academy lore, an original screenplay win is usually for an outlier. It's for someone a bit new, someone a bit different, who does something kind of quirky with the work. So you can see that in something like the win that Greta Gerwig had for Lady Bird, and it's a good award for a lot of young, up-and-coming people who are starting to establish themselves. What's the overall trend we're seeing here in the Oscars and the Academy Awards and all of that stuff? It's that when horror or any other genre film can break through the noise, can have a kind of cultural capital that really means something and that transcends the horror genre, it can get recognition. If you love a movie but it stays within its genre, it's probably not going to get an Academy Award nomination. And another big thing to consider is the dreaded Academy Award campaign. Now, this is something studios invest millions of dollars in, millions. And if a studio isn't pushing a film, it's very unlikely that it'll even get a nomination. So let's say this year, for instance, a lot of people are really upset that Toni Collette didn't get nominated for Hereditary. I know, it's all very upsetting. But you can actually look to the studio and the distributor, and that would be A24. On social media, you can go talk to them. And they're an indie production house. They do things really well, but they don't have the huge budget that bigger studios have. So they sunk all of their Academy Award Oscar campaign money into Paul Schrader's First Reformed.
Since you had no idea that he was thinking of...
No, I'm so frightened.
That's what happened. So don't necessarily get mad at the Academy members or someone else because the person you love didn't get nominated. Get mad at people who run Oscar campaigns. And I do want to talk about the way the public has influenced the Academy and the Oscars. So back in 2015 into the 2016 nominations, there was the trending hashtag #OscarsSoWhite. And this came about because of all the 20 acting nominees that year, they were all white. They were all white, and this was a year where you had Straight Outta Compton, you had Creed, you had amazing performances by actors of color that just weren't being recognized. And it wasn't just in acting categories, it was across the board. So people started calling for real change. The Academy heard this, kicked out some older members, and started trying to integrate newer members with diverse backgrounds, trying to achieve a 50-50 split in terms of gender within the Academy. So they heard and they're making changes, and it's still not quite there. But for whatever it's worth, they are listening and they are trying. Another important thing that's happened kind of within the last decade or so when it comes to the Oscars is the movement of the Best Picture nominees going from 5 nominees to 10. If you think this stuff about Hereditary is bad, like remember when The Dark Knight didn't get nominated for Best Picture. I remember that. People were beside themselves. And the Academy, again, and to their credit, whatever credit you want to give them, opened it up next year to include 10 films if there were enough nominations to account for those more popular films that its audience would maybe really love to see get an award. And since 2008, when this whole scandal with The Dark Knight happened, to this year, we have our first superhero film Best Picture nomination with Black Panther. So it can change. It can change and it can get better. So that's a really important thing to remember, that we as fans, we as consumers, our power lies with where we spend our money. If you love a film, if you want to champion a film, make sure you're paying money to see it. Make sure you tweet about it. Make sure you tweet at the distributor about it. And hopefully they will recognize that that good films are not just limited to their genre. they can expand, and we can be the champions that help push them forward. So I hope you've enjoyed this kind of look back at a lot of films that the Academy Awards and the Oscars have celebrated throughout their decades and decades and decades of existing. And some really great films have won and been nominated. And I can't wait to see who wins this year and who wins next year and what happens when Bradley Cooper doesn't win and the light goes out of his eyes. I'm Alex West.